He's finished, ma'am. Completely burnt out. Chief Warrant Officer Martinez spoke with the clipped certainty of someone who believed his experience made him infallible. His voice cut through the humid air of the military working dog facility like a blade through silk. We've exhausted every option. Had our top specialists working with him for 7 months straight. He won't respond to anything. Nothing gets through. The small gathering of trainers and veterinary staff shifted uncomfortably, their body language broadcasting resignation. They glanced between the woman standing before them, the magnificent Belgian Malinois locked in his reinforced kennel, and back again. Their faces wore identical masks of weary sympathy mixed with barely concealed irritation. The dog, a powerful specimen named Titan with a coat like burnished copper and coal, had once been spoken of in hushed reverence throughout the special operations community, a ghost who had walked through 100 midnight operations. But ghosts fade. He sat with an unnatural rigidity that spoke not of discipline but of profound disconnection, a warrior turned to stone. His amber eyes stared into a void only he could see. His ears remained fixed forward, deaf to the world. His powerful frame was utterly motionless. He was a magnificent machine whose power had been permanently severed. The woman Martinez addressed remained silent as stone herself. She was unremarkable in appearance, medium build, dark brown hair pulled into a functional bun, wearing faded jeans and a worn canvas jacket that had seen better years. There was something about her stillness that felt deliberate, absolute, as if she had learned to exist without disturbing the air around her. She didn't acknowledge Martinez's dismissive tone or react to the pity in the other's eyes. Her focus was entirely on Titan, but her gaze held no sadness. It was analytical, penetrating, as though she were reading invisible text written in the space between them. From his position on the observation deck above the kennels, Lieutenant Colonel Jackson watched the scene unfold with growing interest. He was a career infantry officer with 28 years of service, and he'd learned to read people the way others read books. The woman's posture caught his attention immediately, weight perfectly distributed, shoulders relaxed yet square, hands loose at her sides. It was the stance of someone who had nothing to prove because they had already proven everything. He'd seen that bearing before, in the deadliest operators he'd ever commanded. The calm before the storm. The stillness of absolute mastery. Martinez, oblivious to the colonel's scrutiny from above, pressed forward with his assessment, transforming the moment into a demonstration of his supposed expertise. "You need to understand something, ma'am," he continued, his tone dripping with condescension, as if explaining calculus to a toddler. "A military working dog like Titan is a precision instrument. These animals are conditioned through thousands of hours of specialized training. When that conditioning fractures, whether through psychological trauma or simple mental degradation, the animal becomes operationally useless. It's an unfortunate reality of our profession." He gestured toward Titan's enclosure with theatrical emphasis. "We've implemented every protocol in the manual. Our senior handler, a man with 23 years in military canine operations, worked with him daily for months. Zero response. Our chief veterinarian conducted a complete neurological workup, full behavioral assessment, the works. All tests came back negative for physical pathology. We've cycled through every command structure, verbal, visual, tactical signals he was trained on during deployment. We've tried positive reinforcement, negative conditioning, environmental manipulation." He paused, clearly proud of his thoroughness. The result is always identical. Complete non-responsiveness. The animal's consciousness has, for lack of a better term, simply vacated the premises. What remains is merely a biological shell. Beautiful, expensive, and tragically non-functional. He turned to face the woman directly, a smirk touching the corners of his mouth. "So, with all due respect, what exactly do you, a civilian with no credentials listed in your file, believe you can accomplish that my entire team of certified professionals has failed to achieve?" The challenge hung in the air like smoke. It was designed to humiliate, to establish dominance, to close the book on this animal's fate while simultaneously dismissing this unremarkable woman as a naive idealist. The assembled personnel averted their eyes, uncomfortable participants in what felt like a public execution of hope. The woman's expression remained unchanged. Her eyes, which had been fixed on Titan, slowly shifted to meet Martinez's gaze. There was no anger in them, no wounded pride. Only a crystalline clarity that made the chief warrant officer suddenly, inexplicably uncomfortable. She held his stare for a long moment, the silence stretching between them like a wire pulled taut. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, even, completely devoid of emotion. "May I enter the enclosure?" 5 words. They weren't a request. They weren't a challenge. They were simply a statement of what would happen next. Martinez, thrown by her complete lack of defensiveness, could only scoff. "Be my guest. Waste whatever time you'd like." He made an expansive gesture toward the kennel gate, a king granting a fool permission to demonstrate their folly. "Corporal, unlock the door." A young Marine fumbled with his keyring, the metallic jangle unnaturally loud in the tense atmosphere. The heavy steel gate swung open with a groan of hinges. The woman moved, and everything about that first step was deliberate, measured, a language written in motion. The world seemed to contract around her, the background noise of the facility fading to a distant hum as she began her approach toward the silent warrior. Her method was a masterclass in unspoken communication. She didn't walk directly toward the kennel, that would be confrontational, threatening. Instead, she traced a wide, curving arc, presenting her side rather than her front, reducing her profile as a potential threat. Her footfalls were soft, purposeful, barely audible on the concrete. Her body was loose, her movements fluid, her hands held naturally at her sides with palms slightly open. She was the physical embodiment of non-aggression, speaking a primal language that transcended species. The onlookers watched with varying expressions, some cynical, some curious, most expecting either violent reaction or the same soul-crushing nothingness that had greeted them for months. Martinez watched with barely concealed satisfaction, already mentally composing his report on the failed intervention. Inside the enclosure, Titan remained frozen. His 1,000-yard stare remained fixed on some invisible battlefield, his body locked in the prison of his trauma. The woman stopped approximately 12 feet from the open gate. She didn't call out. She didn't make any sound. She simply stood there, utterly still, for a full 90 seconds. Her breathing was slow, rhythmic, almost meditative. She was entering his world, attuning herself to the frequency of his silence. Then, with controlled precision that spoke of exceptional body awareness, she lowered herself into a crouch, reducing her height, making herself smaller and less imposing. Her gaze remained soft, directed at the ground near his position rather than making direct eye contact, which could be perceived as challenge or aggression. Another minute passed. The tension in the yard thickened. The cynical expressions on several faces began to waver, replaced by confused fascination. This wasn't the approach of an amateur. This was something else, ancient, ritualistic, profound. If you believe that true strength lies not in the volume of one's voice, but in the depth of one's soul, and you want more stories where quiet competence defeats loud arrogance, subscribe to the final watch below. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a change rippled through the tableau. Titan's right ear, which had been locked in position for months, flickered. It was the smallest movement imaginable, barely visible, but in the absolute stillness it was seismic. The ear rotated a fraction of a degree, tuning into a signal no human ear could detect, the vibration of her patience, the frequency of her calm. The woman registered the movement but didn't react. She remained perfectly still, giving him time and space to process. 30 more seconds elapsed, measured in heartbeats. Then, and only then, did she speak. Her voice was barely above a whisper, a breath carrying a single word across the space between them. A word that belonged to no training manual, a word that sounded ancient and primal, forged in darkness and ice. Fenrir. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if the word was a detonation, a shaped charge that blew apart the walls imprisoning his consciousness. Titan's entire body convulsed with violent energy, as though electricity had surged through every muscle. His head, which had been locked in that vacant stare for 7 months, whipped around with frightening speed. His eyes, which had been dull and distant, suddenly blazed with fierce, focused intelligence. They locked onto the woman, and for the first time since his handlers had given up on him, there was recognition. Not just recognition, devotion, absolute trust, and laser-focused purpose. But he didn't bark. He didn't rush toward her. What happened next was far more extraordinary. In one seamless motion, Titan dropped from his sitting position into a tactical low crawl, his belly nearly touching the concrete floor. He advanced 4 feet toward her, moving with predatory silence, then froze completely, his head low, his eyes scanning the area behind her position. He was securing her flank, checking her 6 o'clock. After holding this defensive position for exactly 4 seconds, he rose silently to his feet, pivoted 90 degrees to his right, and sat, his back now perfectly aligned with her crouched form, his gaze sweeping the perimeter of the kennel yard in a systematic pattern. He had become her sentinel, her guardian, her partner. It was an intricate, multi-phase tactical drill executed with flawless precision, a silent symphony of lethal purpose. The entire sequence took less than 6 seconds. Then there was only silence. A silence so complete, so overwhelming, that it seemed to swallow all sound within 100 yards. The assembled personnel stood frozen, their expressions identical masks of shock. Mouths hung open. Eyes were wide with disbelief. A young corporal who had been leaning casually against a wall straightened abruptly, as if snapped to attention by an invisible general. Chief Warrant Officer Martinez's face had drained of all color. The small notepad he'd been holding slipped from nerveless fingers and hit the concrete with a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot. That's impossible," he whispered, the words barely audible. "That can't." He looked from the dog, now a portrait of perfect military bearing, to the crouching woman, and back again, his entire worldview crumbling in real time. The foundation of his expertise, his carefully constructed identity as a master trainer, had been obliterated by a single incomprehensible word spoken by a woman he dismissed as incompetent. Titan ignored them all. His entire universe had collapsed into a single point of reference, the woman. He sat, a living weapon, absolutely calm and absolutely ready, every fiber of his being asking one silent question: what's the mission? The sound of the dropped notepad seemed to break the spell of stunned paralysis, but it was immediately replaced by a new tension as a figure emerged from the administrative building. Lieutenant Colonel Jackson descended the external stairs with measured, unhurried steps. He was a tall man in his mid-50s, his uniform crisp, his bearing that of someone who had commanded in the worst places on earth. His face was weathered by decades of hard decisions, his gray eyes sharp and penetrating. He didn't acknowledge the shell-shocked personnel or the pale Martinez. His attention was entirely on the woman and the dog. He crossed the yard with deliberate purpose and stopped at a respectful distance, roughly 15 feet away. The IR seemed to crystallize around him. His gaze was not on Titan, who remained a perfect statue of military discipline, but on the woman, who was now slowly rising to her feet. He studied her face with the intensity of someone attempting to place a half-remembered photograph, a face from a classified briefing, a ghost from the world of shadows. The word she had spoken, Fenrir, echoed in his mind. It was a name from Norse mythology, the great wolf bound by the gods. But in the classified world he'd occasionally brushed against, it was something else. A designation. A program that officially didn't exist. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low rumble that carried absolute authority. It wasn't the voice of a commander addressing a subordinate or a civilian. It was the voice of one warrior addressing another. "Ma'am," he began, the single word weighted with respect that had been utterly absent from Martinez's earlier address. "Were you ever assigned to the 75th? He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. In their world, in the world of classified operations and black budgets, some things were communicated by what remained unspoken. The woman met his gaze steadily and gave a single, slight nod. A universe of meaning passed between them in that one gesture: acknowledgement, confirmation, shared membership in a brotherhood that existed in the margins of official records. Lieutenant Colonel Jackson's jaw tightened with understanding. His expression hardened, not with anger but with the weight of revelation. He turned his head slightly, his cold gaze falling upon Chief Warrant Officer Martinez, who looked like a man watching his career detonate in slow motion. "Chief Martinez," the colonel's voice was like the crack of Arctic ice. Martinez flinched visibly. "Sir," he managed, his voice small and strained. "Go to my office. On my desk is a secure access terminal. You will log into the Special Operations Command personnel database using the credentials I've written on the notepad. You will search for MWD Asset Designation, FENRA 5. Then you will cross-reference that file with all after-action reports for Operation Shadowfall. You have exactly 6 minutes. Execute." The order was delivered with the force of a judge's gavel. Each word was a nail driven home. Martinez, his face now completely ashen with dawning horror, didn't ask questions. He spun on his heel and ran toward the building, his footsteps echoing across the concrete. The sheer terror in his movements was a stark contrast to the profound calm that had settled over the rest of the yard. The mystery was about to be exposed, and everyone present understood that the truth would fundamentally alter their understanding of everything. Martinez returned in 5 minutes and 38 seconds, moving like a man in shock. He was walking, he was stumbling, his body operating on autopilot while his mind tried desperately to process what he'd just read. He clutched a single sheet of paper printed from a secure system, and his hands trembled so violently the paper rattled audibly. He came to a halt before Lieutenant Colonel Jackson, his eyes wide with the kind of fear that goes beyond concern for rank or career. It was the existential terror of a man who has glimpsed a truth far larger and more dangerous than his small world had prepared him for. He tried to speak, but his throat had gone completely dry. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, and tried again. "Sir, the file. His voice was barely recognizable, stripped of all its former confidence. Colonel Jackson didn't reach for the paper. He didn't need to see what was written there. He looked at the woman, then addressed the assembled personnel, his voice carrying the weight of final judgment. "Let me tell you what that document says," he began, his tone low and resonant, each word deliberately placed. "It says that military working dog asset K-927, call sign Titan, is not a standard kennel asset. His official designation is FENRA 5, a Tier 1 direct action canine asset assigned exclusively to Joint Special Operations Command's most sensitive operations." A collective intake of breath rippled through the small crowd. These weren't just words. They were a fundamental reordering of reality. Titan wasn't simply a dog. He was a classified weapons system, operating at a level most of them would never even be briefed on. The colonel continued, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. "It says that this animal is not trained on standard military working dog protocols. He is trained on a proprietary command structure developed specifically for deep penetration operations, a system that uses unique verbal and nonverbal cues known exclusively to his designated handler. The protocol is classified top secret, special access required." Jackson's eyes finally landed back on Martinez, and they were cold as January stone. "And what that document says about this woman standing before you," he said, his voice dropping to a more intense register, "is that you have not been addressing a civilian. You have been in the presence of Master Chief Petty Officer Elena Reyes, United States Navy, retired." He let the rank hang in the air, watching it detonate in their minds. Her last duty assignment was as the senior enlisted leader and founding operator for the Naval Special Warfare Development Group's Advanced Canine Operations Cell. She didn't just train these animals. She designed the entire program. She wrote the methodology. She created the protocols. She is the architect. The colonel took a deliberate step closer to Martinez, his voice rising to a controlled intensity that seemed to vibrate in the air itself. This dog is not broken, Chief. He has spent the last 7 months in hell, surrounded by strangers using commands he was never trained to recognize, waiting with a loyalty you cannot begin to comprehend for the only person in the world his entire being is coded to respond to. He was waiting for his handler. What happened next would be recounted in whispered reverence for years to come. Lieutenant Colonel Jackson, a career officer with 3 combat deployments and 2 Bronze Stars, turned to face Elena Reyes, brought his heels together with a sharp crack, and rendered a perfect, crisp salute. It wasn't a casual acknowledgement between peers. It was a gesture of profound, almost sacred respect, a formal recognition from a conventional warrior to a shadow operator whose true service was written in blood and buried in classified files that would never see daylight. "Master Chief Reyes," he said, his voice ringing with both authority and genuine humility, "it is an honor to have you on this installation. Welcome home." The story of what transpired in the kennel yard that afternoon didn't spread through normal gossip channels. It detonated through the base's social fabric like a shock wave, moving with the force of legend being born in real time. Before nightfall, the tale was being recounted in mess halls, barracks, and operations centers in the hushed, reverent tones usually reserved for tales of extraordinary valor. In the enlisted dining facility, young sailors leaned across tables, speaking in awed whispers about the ghost handler and the ancient word that resurrected a hero. At the senior chief's mess that evening, a group of weathered combat veterans, men who had seen and survived the worst warfare had to offer, raised their glasses in silent tribute to an unseen Master Chief and a dog named Titan. The words, Fenrir 5 and Operation Shadowfall, became instant mythology, symbols of a level of professionalism and sacrifice that existed in a realm beyond the understanding of conventional forces. But the most profound transformation was personal, occurring in the soul of Chief Warrant Officer Martinez. The event didn't simply humble him, it completely deconstructed the arrogant facade he had spent years building. The next morning, he found Elena Reyes exactly where he knew she would be, back at the kennels, sitting cross-legged inside Titan's enclosure. She was brushing the Malinois with slow, rhythmic strokes, and the dog was transformed, his body relaxed, his eyes clear and bright, leaning into her touch with an expression of pure contentment that seemed impossible given his months of catatonic silence. Martinez stopped at the gate, holding his cover in both hands, his posture that of a man seeking absolution. "Master Chief," he began, his voice quiet and stripped entirely of its previous swagger, "I came to apologize. What I said yesterday, how I conducted myself, it was inexcusable. Ignorant. Arrogant. Unprofessional. I have no defense for my behavior. I was wrong, and I am deeply, sincerely sorry." Elena didn't stop brushing. For a long moment, she was silent, and Martinez stood there prepared to accept any condemnation, any punishment he so richly deserved. But when she finally spoke, her voice was gentle, carrying no trace of anger or judgment. "He's not a tool, Chief," she said softly, her eyes still on Titan. "He's not a piece of equipment or an asset designation in a database. He's a partner. He feels. He remembers. He grieves. And he trusts with an absoluteness that humans can barely comprehend. But that trust must be earned through patience and respect. It can never be demanded. Never forget that." Martinez nodded, his throat tight. The simple lesson, delivered with such quiet grace, cut deeper than any formal reprimand ever could. "I won't, Master Chief. I swear to you, I will never forget." He stood there for another moment, watching the profound, silent communion between the woman and the warrior. A bond forged in the crucible of clandestine combat, tempered by shared danger, unbreakable. He was witnessing something he had claimed to be an expert in, but was seeing for the first time through the lens of humility. It was the first day of his education. In the weeks that followed, Elena Reyes did not leave. At Lieutenant Colonel Jackson's personal request, she agreed to remain temporarily as a consultant for the facility's working dog program. She took no office, no formal title. Her work was conducted on the concrete floors of the kennels and the dusty training fields, moving among the handlers not as a legend or superior, but as a quiet mentor whose every action was a lesson. She taught not through PowerPoint presentations or formal instruction, but through demonstration and presence. She showed a nervous young handler how to build trust with an anxious dog, not by forcing compliance through dominance, but by sitting in shared silence for 2 hours, simply existing in the same space with patience and calm energy. She taught them that the leash wasn't a control mechanism, but a communication line, a physical translation of intention and trust. She helped them reframe a dog's stress signals not as behavioral problems requiring correction, but as intelligence, information telling the handler to adjust their own energy, their own approach, their own assumptions. Her influence was transformative. The harsh, aggressive training methodology that had characterized the facility began to soften, replaced by quiet commands, subtle communication, and an atmosphere of mutual respect. The handlers started calling it the Reyes Protocol, a philosophy built on the foundation of her quiet, absolute competence. The most dramatic transformation was in Chief Martinez. He became her devoted student, absorbing every lesson with the fervor of a convert. He unlearned years of entrenched habits, replacing his need to dominate with a genuine desire to understand. He learned to truly listen, to the animals, to the silence, to the subtle languages written in body posture and energy. One afternoon, a young corporal took a piece of scrap wood and a black marker. He carefully lettered 2 words onto it, the waiting place. He walked to the isolation kennel where Titan had spent 7 months in psychological solitary confinement and hung the handmade sign on the door. It was an unofficial memorial, a quiet tribute to a loyalty so profound it had endured months of silent hell, waiting for a single word from a single person to be called back to life. The legend of the word Fenrir also took root in the base's culture. Martinez, after conducting his own research, explained its significance to the other handlers. In Norse mythology, Fenrir was the great wolf, child of Loki, prophesied to bring about Ragnarok. He was so powerful the gods themselves feared him, binding him with unbreakable chains. The name was no longer just a strange word. It became embedded in the facility's identity, a term for the unbreakable bond between warrior and partner, a code for loyalty that transcended protocol and defied a world that tried to write off broken things as irredeemable. 18 months passed. The changes at the facility were no longer temporary initiatives, they were institutional doctrine. What had once been a competent but unremarkable operation had become the premier military working dog facility in naval special warfare, a center of excellence that other installations studied and attempted to replicate. The program's operational success rates had increased dramatically. Failure rates for new dog handler teams had dropped to nearly 0. More significantly, the animals themselves were different. Calmer, more focused, their bonds with their handlers visibly deeper, built on foundations of trust and respect rather than domination and compliance. The new officer in charge of the program was Chief Warrant Officer Martinez. The promotion had surprised some, but not Lieutenant Colonel Jackson, who had watched the profound metamorphosis of the man. The arrogance was gone entirely, replaced by quiet, steady confidence rooted in genuine mastery and hard-won wisdom. Martinez began every training course for new handlers the exact same way. He would gather the recruits, young, eager faces filled with confidence and assumptions, and lead them not to the training field, but to the empty kennel bearing the small handwritten sign that still read, "The Waiting Place." He would stand before the door and tell them the story. He told them about the legendary dog who had gone silent, the arrogant chief who had condemned him to death, and the quiet woman in unremarkable clothes who humbled an entire base with a single word. He told it not as folklore or entertainment, but as a fundamental lesson, a cautionary tale that defined everything they were about to learn. Your greatest enemy in this profession isn't on the battlefield, he would tell them, his voice low and serious, every word carefully chosen. It's your own assumptions. It's the arrogance that convinces you that you know everything. It's the failure to see the living, feeling, thinking partner at the other end of the leash as anything more than a tool. He would point to the sign. This kennel stands as our reminder that loyalty flows in both directions. That dog wasn't broken. The system was. He was holding himself to a standard we had forgotten existed. He was waiting for a professional worthy of his trust. Your job, every single day, is to be the person your partner is waiting for. The story of Elena and Titan became the foundational mythology of the entire program, a living lesson more powerful than any regulation or training manual. It taught the handlers that competence didn't need to announce itself, that respect was a language deeper than words, and that the most profound strength often arrived in the quietest packages. The legacy of that single afternoon wasn't carved in marble or cast in bronze. It was a living, breathing thing, carried forward in the quiet competence of every handler Martinez trained. It was present in the shared understanding between handler and dog as they prepared for dangerous missions. It was in the institutional memory of a facility that had learned a hard, valuable lesson about the danger of assumptions and the power of humility. Elena Reyes and Titan were long gone. After 4 months, her work complete, she had quietly processed Titan's official retirement paperwork, a process Lieutenant Colonel Jackson personally expedited through the bureaucratic maze. The last anyone saw of them was her weathered pickup truck driving through the main gate, the magnificent Malinois sitting proudly in the passenger seat, his gaze fixed on the woman at the wheel, a warrior finally granted peace. There was no ceremony, no formation, no formal goodbye. Their departure was as quiet and understated as her arrival. Months later, someone anonymously sent Martinez a photograph. It showed a wide green field beneath an endless blue sky. In the field, Titan, the warrior once lost to trauma, was joyfully chasing a ball, his body a blur of pure, uninhibited happiness. At the edge of the frame, you could just see the corner of a simple porch and a woman's hand resting on a book. It was a portrait of quiet victory, the true reward for a lifetime of silent, selfless service. True legacy is never about monuments we build or stories we tell about ourselves. It is not what we leave behind, but what we leave within others. It is the wisdom that gets passed down, the standards that are upheld long after we've departed. It is the quiet ripple of our competence that continues expanding, touching shores we will never see. It is the proof that a single act of quiet professionalism can echo louder than 1,000 arrogant voices, reverberating forever in the culture of those who witnessed it. Elena Reyes had come to save one dog. In doing so, she had rescued the soul of an entire institution, reminding them that the greatest honor isn't found in recognition, but in being worthy of the trust placed in you by those who cannot speak, who can only show you through their unwavering loyalty what true partnership means. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption, and where unwavering loyalty defines true worth, subscribe to The Final Watch.